Welcome to today's EACC webinar, Doing Business in the Metaverse. Do we need a Chief Metaverse Officer? This event is organized by the European American Chamber of Commerce and our network of chapters across the United States and Europe. The EACC, the European American Chamber of Commerce. And we are where Europeans and Americans connect to do business. My name is Kristina Slizinska. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida chapter of the European American Chamber of Commerce. And we are the lead organizer for this program. So before we start, here's a few housekeeping issues. If you wish to ask questions during the event, the interface or control panel is in the upper right-hand side of your screen. Please use the function called questions at any time to join the discussion. One disclaimer, note that all comments and opinions presented by our speakers are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the EACC or of its members. And a final note, we're recording this presentation and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in the very near future. We have a really interesting audience from both sides of the Atlantic joining us and look forward to a vibrant discussion. So, companies are rushing to set up stores or buy land there. Artists are selling their art there. And last December, Barbados announced it was opening an embassy there. There, of course, is the Metaverse. And according to 2021 numbers from Global Data Report, mentions of the term Metaverse rose by over 135% in companies' earnings calls for Q4 2021. The media also reported that a plot of virtual real estate in Decentraland sold for $2.43 million US, and the crypto asset management firm Grayscale estimates the metaverse is $1 trillion revenue opportunity. So, with new business opportunity also come regulatory and legal challenges. That's what we're here to talk about. So, is now the right time to start looking for a Chief Metaverse Officer? Let's find out with our stellar panel of Metaverse experts. Ben Bilsland is a partner at RSM in the UK. He's a media and technology senior analyst, advising boards through data-driven insight and deep understanding of emergent trends in both technology and the broader economy. Ben is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales, and he joins us from London. Jan Kubic is a principal in the litigation practice at Squire Patton Boggs with a focus on complex litigation matters across diverse financial and commercial industries. Jan joins us from the Squire Patton Boggs offices in Miami and will be our moderator for the day. Dr. Sandra Müller is a partner in the Intellectual Property and Technology Practice Group, also at Squire Patton Boggs. Besides the management of global trademark and design portfolios, a particular focus of Sandra's practice is IP litigation. Sandra joins us from the Squire Patton Boggs offices in Frankfurt, Germany. Mark Trachtenberg is a shareholder at Greenberg Traurig's Chicago office and is the chair of the firm's internet, domain name, e-commerce, and social media practice. Mark has specialized in internet-related matters and protecting and promoting brands online, which includes active participation in internet governance through ICANN. As part of his practice, he regularly advises clients on new technologies, including blockchain, cryptocurrency, and NFTs, in particular with respect to the relationship to brand protection and promotion. Mark joins us from Chicago. And now, without further ado, Jan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Kristina, and welcome everyone to this exciting program. Today, we're going to begin by talking about the foundations, the foundational concepts that make up this Web 3.0 world in which we live. We're then going to ask ourselves the question, what is the metaverse and what are some of the business opportunities within it? And we're then going to shift our discussion to the question of what kind of IP issues are we seeing in this Web3 world? What are the risk areas and how can we protect and enforce IP rights in the metaverse? So without any further ado, I'd like to ask Mark to give us a foundational overview of some of these critical concepts that we're going to be talking about. Mark?
Thanks. Happy to be here with everyone. I think by now everyone has probably seen some TV commercials with celebrities, Matt Damon, Tom Brady, telling them to buy crypto. They've probably seen advertisements for new services that are going to use blockchain to solve long-term problems. And I'm sure everyone's heard about NFTs, whether it's Beeple selling for 69 million or Bored Ape Yacht Club. But with all the discussion about blockchain, crypto, and NFTs, we're finding that a lot of people really don't understand what these things are and how they work, because that's something that none of these ads or stories talk about. And so that's how we're going to start off here today. We're going to start off talking about blockchain. And so what blockchain is a system for securely recording information and transactions in a database that's duplicated and distributed across a network of computer systems. Now, that's a little bit different from the traditional database that you're probably used to. And so the traditional database you're probably used to is the database and the software applications in your company, or what powers the websites that you go to, or if you do online banking, that's going to be powered by a traditional database. And so in that traditional database, all the data is stored in one centralized repository. The data is typically in tables, and you have a centralized authority which dictates the truth, which data is valid to all the other participants in the network, and only certain users or institutions can access the history of transactions or create a new one. And so in a traditional database, those users are going to be individual users like yourself, or maybe different software applications which are accessing that database. Now, a blockchain database is quite different. So in the blockchain database, the data is duplicated and distributed to every single computer on the network. And in the blockchain database, the information is structured in groups known as blocks that hold sets of information. And for this reason, it's called a ledger or distributed ledger technology, which are also terms that you've probably heard in connection with blockchain. So unlike the traditional database, in blockchain, there's not one centralized authority that dictates the truth to all the other participants in the network. Instead, every participant in the network, so every computer on that blockchain network, can access the full history of all the transactions, or can create new transactions on that blockchain. Importantly, the blockchain database can be either public, so for example, like Bitcoin, or it can be private, so that only computers that are on the network have access to the transactions and information. Now, in the blockchain database, the processing and computing energy costs to validate the transactions are borne by the different computers that process the validation algorithms. And so in practice, what actually happens is the user, so the person who wants to engage in the transaction, whether it's buying or selling cryptocurrency or buying an NFT or so forth, that user has to actually pay to reimburse the cost that it took to process the transaction. And this is referred to as gas on Ethereum, but there's a similar concept on the other blockchains as well. And so, as I said, this transaction fee has to be paid for every single transaction that's on the blockchain. And importantly, these fees can vary very widely, and they can change very quickly. So they're affected by things like network congestion or the cost of energy, and they can vary from a cent to $100 or even more. So how does it work? Here we have a little graphic display of blockchain, and essentially, in short, somebody requests a transaction, right? So again, it could be purchasing cryptocurrency, selling it, buying or selling an NFT. That request is broadcast to every computer on that blockchain network. The network computers validate the transaction. They typically do that using some very complicated algorithms. And again, that takes energy and processing power. That transaction can involve cryptocurrency, contracts, records, other information. The transaction, once it's verified, is then completed and it's added to a block. And when the block is full, it's added to the existing blockchain. So what are the benefits of blockchain and why do people use it? Well, there's a number of them. One is increased transparency of transactions. Again, everyone in that blockchain network can see all the different transactions. And if the blockchain is public, everyone in the world can see those transactions. There's also the benefit of security and permanency. And what I mean by this is that in blockchain, it's really difficult to hack or change any of the transaction data, because in order to do so, again, the database is distributed. It's on every computer in the network. So to change a transaction, you would have to go to every block in the chain, which is distributed to every computer on the network. Another benefit is increased efficiency and reduced costs. So in theory, at least, you can eliminate the middleman in a number of processes. So for example, if you use Zelle or some other tool to transfer money, you have to go through a merchant gateway. So with blockchain, the theory is that you can eliminate that middleman, that merchant gateway, and you can just do a direct transaction with another user of the blockchain. But again, there's that concept of gas, right? And so that transactional fee that you're paying sometimes can be higher than the value of the transaction itself. And frankly, this is one factor that's really inhibited the widespread adoption of cryptocurrency as actual currency to be used, as opposed to the speculatory investment that you're generally seeing. So people own Bitcoin not because they want to engage in transactions and paying Bitcoin generally, they're owning Bitcoin because it's valuable. So now let's talk about cryptocurrency. This is basically the use of blockchain to administer a digital currency. So that involves creating the currency and verifying the transactions. Now, each cryptocurrency is actually specific to a particular blockchain. So Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polkadot, Dogecoin, they all exist on different blockchains. And the number of these cryptocurrencies is always increasing because with blockchain, anyone can create their own cryptocurrency. So how do you get it? Well, you typically purchase it through a cryptocurrency exchange. And that's the virtual version of a brick and mortar currency exchange that exchanges in digital currency instead of hard currency. So some pretty well-known examples of these are Coinbase and Crypto.com. Now, depending on the exchange you use, you can sometimes use a debit card, but more often than not, you're going to have to use a bank transfer. Almost all of the major credit card companies will not support transactions for cryptocurrency, and many debit cards prohibited as well. Once you purchase the cryptocurrency, in order to use it, you have to transfer it into a crypto wallet. So for the crypto wallets, there's a number of different providers, including some of the exchanges themselves. Then there's also a number of independent crypto wallet providers as well, like MetaMask. So the wallets come in a variety of different forms. There are mobile apps like Coinbase. There's hardware, which is like a USB stick. An example of that is Ledger. And then there are also web browser extensions like MetaMask. Now, when you have the crypto wallet, there's two keys. The first is a public key, and this is necessary for you to actually use that wallet to engage in transactions. And so this is going to be a long string of numbers and letters. And this example right here is actually the public key for one of my wallets, right? The other key is the private key. And that's how you access a wallet. It's like a password. And this is critical. If you lose the private encryption key, your crypto is inaccessible forever. There is no password reset like every other software or application that you've used. And as an example of how prevalent this issue is, in 2021, it was estimated that of the 18.5 million Bitcoin, around 20% of them, which is worth $140 billion, was lost or in otherwise stranded wallets. So this is an ongoing problem that people have. So finally, let's get to an NFT. What's an NFT? NFT stands for a non-fungible token. And this is the use of blockchain technology to provide public proof of ownership of the thing that the NFT is associated with. So essentially, the NFT is a digital certificate of authenticity. So what can it be associated with? Well, pretty much anything. So most often what we're seeing now is that NFTs are being associated with easily reproducible items, digital items, such as photos, videos, audio, and other digital files. But they've also been associated with more ephemeral things, for example, a moment in time, such as epic plays in NBA games. So NBA has its Top Shot marketplace, where it sells its own NBA branded NFTs, and they have generated over $800 million in sales on that marketplace. Another ephemeral thing NFTs have been associated with, the first tweet, right? So Jack Dorsey sold the first tweet for $2.9 million as an NFT. And so I think now, it helps to better understand NFTs to compare them to cryptocurrency. So with cryptocurrency, It's fungible and interchangeable. One unit is no different than any other. So it's basically the same as $1 bill is no different than any other dollar bill except for the serial number. And with cryptocurrency, again, you're storing this information on the blockchain, but all you're storing generally is the amount, the transaction date, the sender, and the receiver. With NFTs, again, this is information stored on the blockchain, but you're storing additional information as well. And that additional information is related to the thing that the NFT is associated with. Now, unlike cryptocurrency, which is fungible, it's all the same, each NFT is unique and it's not interchangeable. So again, like cryptocurrency, as I mentioned, these NFTs live on a particular blockchain. They don't live on all of them. Each one is specific to a blockchain. Most currently are part of the Ethereum blockchain. And that's because the Ethereum blockchain was designed in a way that it's pretty easy to layer other applications and services on top of it. And to purchase an NFT, you have to use that blockchain's cryptocurrency. So, what about IP rights? So you buy this NFT, what comes with it? Well, generally nothing comes with it, right? So the purchase of the NFT doesn't include any of the underlying intellectual property rights in the thing associated with it. One notable exception is Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? That's very well known. All the celebrities are purchasing these and owning these for very large amounts of money. That's one rare situation where they actually do give the purchaser of the NFT commercial rights. But again, that's the exception. So generally, you don't get any commercial rights. In some cases, you could have some. So the NFT might come with the rights to, for an image, let's say, to create 1,000 mugs or 1,000 t-shirts, or to do something else with that NFT. And if they do come with those rights are typically going to be provided either in the platform terms, so meaning the platform where you buy the NFT, or in some smart contract that is part of the NFT itself. But here again, it's important to make sure that there's no conflict between whatever the platform terms say you can do and whatever the smart contract is that's embedded in the NFT. Another issue here is that it can be very difficult to verify that the creator or seller of the NFT has any or sufficient IP rights to create the NFT in the first place. And this is something that Sandra is going to be talking about later. So some benefits of NFTs for creators include additional revenue streams from a photo, image, or other thing that they created. And this includes the ability of the creator to receive royalties on all subsequent sales of the NFT. And so with a traditional piece of artwork, let's say you have a digital photograph and the photographer wants to sell a limited edition run of 10 prints of that photo. They can number those prints and sign those prints and sell them off. But once they're sold, the photographer never sees another penny. Whereas in an NFT, you can build in a royalty. So every time that NFT is sold, the photographer gets a royalty. There's also increased transparency of transactions. So as these NFTs are bought and sold, people can see what they were bought and sold for. And again, security and permanency, the blockchain's immutable, you can't really change it. But there's also benefits for brands. And for brands, we have a new channel to promote the brand's company or products and services. And also, again, the opportunity to create additional revenue streams from existing assets. And so examples are, again, NBA Top Shot, right? They generated over $800 million in selling NFTs for images of players, but also for moments in time in well-known games. Here's an example of Snapple, which is promoting their new Elements beverage. And what they did here was they created a drop of 5,000 NFTs that were created by well-known street artists. You have Pepsi. They partnered with the Billboard Music Awards and they did a live drop during the awards. Well-known band Chainsmokers, they did a drop of 5,000 NFTs, which actually include a 1% cut of the royalties of their next album. Here's Anheuser-Busch, who was trying to promote their new alcohol-free beverage, did a partnership with Dwayne Wade where they sold a limited number of these NFTs, which come with a virtual Dwayne Wade jersey. And so where do you get NFTs, right? We're hearing a lot about them. There's several ways to get them. You can get them directly from the creator, which could be an individual. And so here, the artist or photographer would market the NFT on social media and list it for sale on an NFT marketplace like OpenSea or Rarible. For the brand, If it's a brand NFT, you can either get it directly from the brand platform like NBA Top Shot, or they might actually drop it on a marketplace like One Of. You can also get them on the secondary market because, again, there's a very active market in these NFTs where people are reselling them. So this is OpenSea, which is one of the most well-known NFT marketplaces, and Rarible, which is another NFT marketplace where you can purchase NFTs and sell them. This is NBA Top Shot again. So although there's a number of great benefits for NFTs, there's also a number of risks. And these include, as I mentioned before, the lack of clarity of the associated IP rights. Does the creator of the NFT have rights? We don't know. There's nothing to stop anyone from creating an NFT incorporating third-party IP. There's also no centralized authority to resolve disputes or to reverse fraudulent or problematic transactions. So if you buy a fake NFT, there's not really a good remedy for you. And then finally, the regulatory treatment's unclear. We're seeing a lot of talk in Congress in the US and in the lawmaking bodies of other countries of how to treat NFTs. It's possible that some or all of them can be treated as securities or otherwise, but that's something that we really don't know yet.
Well, very interesting, Mark. Thank you for that. Sandra, I'd like to turn to you and ask you, what are you seeing in terms of brands making use of the NFTs that Mark talked about in the EU?
We have actually seen an increased interest of brand owners in NFTs recently, and it's somewhat developed as a kind of trend that spilled over from the US to us probably several months ago. And what we see is a broad spectrum of many different uses. So first of all, there are NFT collections that are launched by brand owners where NFTs are associated with digital items or physical items, collectibles or both. And one example is the Adidas Originals Into the Metaverse collection, where you could trade in your so-called Phase 1 NFT for a physical item, which was co-designed by Adidas and major players of the NFT scene. And then you got a new Phase 2 NFT for it, by which you now somewhat progress to the next level of the Adidas virtual world. So obviously, the strategy aimed at motivating consumers and keeping them excited about the brand. Another trend is certainly NFT trading cards in the sports industry. For example, the German Football Association offers trading cards of the German national teams, and even Deutsche Telekom, German telecommunications company, they developed NFT artwork for the first time. So there's really a lot of going on the NFT collection sector. And what we also see are companies creating virtual experiences around their brands that somewhat oscillate between interactive gaming and social media and lifestyle experiences. One good example is Gucci Town, which is a collaboration with Roblox, where you can learn about the heritage of the brand on the website and purchase virtual items, style your avatar with Gucci wearables, and participate in virtual events. And actually, there have been many European fashion brands also attending the first Metaverse Fashion Week, which was hosted by Decentraland. So, and some companies are even creating their own Metaverse platforms. So really, like just in the US, a very sports spectrum and a lot of going on at the moment.
Interesting. And Ben, how do you see the use of NFTs evolving in the UK market?
Well, it's very similar to what Sandra and Mark have been talking about. I think the thing I'd touch on without repeating, because it's very similar, is there is this kind of misinformation in the market. And I'll talk about an example where we had a fairly high profile retired soccer player, a football player. He was promoting a non-fungible token and saying it had a guaranteed minimum value because it had something baked in where it couldn't be sold for less than you paid for it. And he was saying that you couldn't lose value. Well, actually, you can lose value because in theory, if you can't sell it, it has no value in an open market, does it? But it's a great example where what we're seeing in this emergent technology, maybe at a consumer level, and in the excitement, is a little bit of misinformation because people don't really understand what they're buying, and they just maybe think it's like guaranteed income. So that's an isolated example, but it kind of shows why some people are becoming a little bit skeptical about these things. But they're in open use, people are using them, people know them, and people are excited by them.
Excellent. Very interesting. Ben, sticking with you, I'd like to turn to sort of zoom out a bit and turn to maybe the $1 million question. And that's the question that we see on the screen right now. And that is, what is the metaverse?
Well, look, I don't think it's $1 million question. Apparently, it's a $13 trillion question according to Citibank. So, like, let me just talk about like the economic potential, right? So, Citibank released a report, I think, in May. They talked about the metaverse being an $8 trillion to $13 trillion market, and the way they built that projection was they basically said that between 20 and 25% of global GDP will be digital by 2030. And then they estimated a penetration rate within that digital economy about 33%. And the two variables they used was they said, well, actually, like pre-pandemic, research showed the US economy was 10% digital. They think that that will move upwards, especially through and post-pandemic. And in terms of that 30 to 40% market penetration, they looked at smartphone usage and said, look, within 7 years of the smartphone being released, it captured 33% of the mobile handset market. So in theory, if Metaverse does the same and more, that's how you get to this kind of $8 trillion to $13 trillion market, which is crazy, right? And then the other side of this is you look at Bloomberg projections. They're saying by 2025, this is a $800 billion market. They're only looking at kind of the entertainment and gaming and artwork aspects of this, what exists today. But what you have got is an enormous market. Total addressable market. But like, what is it, right? And I think that's what you asked me to say, like, what is it? So to me, when we're talking about the metaverse, what we're talking about is working towards a point in time where our digital and physical realities are fully integrated. What that means, if you like wake up in the morning, is you wake up, you get out of bed, you turn on your mirror and you sort of speak to your room and it shows you the rainforest in the Amazon. When you put on your glasses, you walk down the street, you say, I want to go to the office, and the GPS shows in augmented reality in your glasses, it shows you the way. When you get to work, you communicate through a number of different digital means from your desk. That could be attending meetings we use the word avatar. An avatar is a digital representation of kind of yourself. So you might go into a meeting, be represented by this kind of character in the metaverse. And you have all these other really exciting ideas, like you can build complete digital replicas of your production line, of your office. You can then kind of blend all these things together. So where are we now? We're not there yet, because what I'm talking about is a kind of point in time, which is probably 20 years away. And there are kind of 4 columns that stop us getting there, and I'll talk about those in a moment. Where we now is we have some very large online communities. One of them is Roblox. And in these online communities, people are accessing them through their tablets and through their computers, and they're socializing through use of avatars. They're learning skills like how to work in a digital environment. And what's really kind of exciting about this is, I think Roblox, before they went public, listed 200 million monthly users. Netflix has over 200 million users. But what you've got is a different demographic, because I think it's 66% of children between 9 and 12 operate on Roblox. So the generation coming through are playing in these digital worlds. They're learning how to operate in a kind of metaverse environment. And when they kind of mature and come through to the workforce or indeed higher education, they're going to be very comfortable with this idea of blending physical and digital. And I think I'll just round off on a final bit, because I talk about going into a digital world and people switch off and say, I don't want that, I like people. What I'm saying is your digital kind of interactions are of equal value to your physical interactions. But to get there, the supportive technologies like the hardware, the headsets, the computing, the haptic technologies, they need to be just as interactive as real. And then you can get the blend right however you want to be happy and have a kind of fulfilled life. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of a lot of information. Is there anything you want me to go back on and expand on, or?
Can you just talk with us about the business opportunities that you talked about the numbers? What are some of the business opportunities with using this platform?
So let me talk about what's happening now, and then I'll talk about some of the kind of applications in the future, which I think are really exciting. So what's happening now is you have these kind of digital worlds where there's a lot of entertainment. So gaming's driving this, right? So if you go into Roblox and you go into Fortnite, they're holding events with like music concerts, which have, millions of people attending and watching. They're launching promo for new films in this space. And Sandra touched on it. We have these kind of universes like Gucci Land, where you go in and you see products, and people are kind of selling digital equivalents of physical items. And there's a story somewhere about a Gucci handbag that sold for more in the metaverse as an NFT than it did physically. When we get to a point where we have, I'm going to call it a true metaverse, an evolved metaverse, you have all these other really exciting applications. So if you want to talk about industrials and manufacturing, you have this concept of digital replicas. And what that means is you kind of create a fully digital equivalent of your own manufacturing facility in the metaverse, and you can use that to prototype and troubleshoot and trial different ways of doing production. Effectively, it kind of uses digital to kind of streamline your process. And we're already seeing that in the US military. They're training people who service attack helicopters using virtual reality and digital replicas. They're finding that the training time is going from 12 weeks to 8 weeks, because instead of learning on the physical asset, I guess the people in the military are learning using the haptic tools. A couple of other areas of really exciting use cases: medical. There's this kind of concept of GPS for surgeons. So the idea that you put on glasses, these glasses have the information the surgeon needs to do their job. They can interact with their colleagues in other areas and make sure they're doing the right thing. You can also use the metaverse to have much more effective diagnosis, much more effective kind of remote care. That's really good. And then education is really exciting, because if you can create a digital environment that's equally, I guess, as engaging as a classroom, you can use one teacher to educate thousands of people. You can actually bring the best teachers to everybody globally, and you can scale it in a way that we've not, you can't even imagine. Because at the moment, we're kind of limited by what we have. We all know that our kids don't really learn when they're on Zoom, they switch off. But if they go into a metaverse where they're more engaged, they can go inside a volcano and see how it erupts. They can travel to Mars. They can go back in time and see Leonardo da Vinci. Suddenly they might learn in a different way. So these are kind of some of the more, I'm going to call it forward-looking use cases that might exist in the future.
It's fascinating. Sandra, can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of engagement with this metaverse in the EU?
Oh, well, according to statistics, the entire idea of the metaverse and Web3 has not yet reached the average consumer. There was a new survey, for example, by Ipsos, made for the World Economic Forum on the topic how the world sees the metaverse and extended reality. And they asked the question, how familiar are you with each of the three concepts: virtual reality, augmented reality, and the metaverse? And so interestingly, Germany, for example, and France scored in all three categories amongst the countries with the lowest rates of familiarity with these concepts. But we have to say that the rates vary widely, even in the EU. And of course, you have to be careful with service and statistics, but there are other sources which seem to support that. For example, Deloitte did an online survey recently, interviewing a sample of 2,000 consumers in Germany. And according to that survey, 41% have heard of the term metaverse, and 27% at least considered themselves as knowing what it is, basically. And it's basically the same for NFTs. There was a survey conducted by a digital association, Bitkom, that showed that probably 2/3 of the German public has never heard of NFTs, and about half of those who had are still skeptical for all sorts of reasons, and consider it probably being a hype that will soon over, quite soon. So against this background, I guess we are probably not too enthusiastic at the moment, but may still come.
Mark, I mean, given what we've heard from Sandra, do you see the metaverse as being a US-centric concept?
Well, of course, in the US, we see everything as a US-centric concept, but I think it's impossible to say what the metaverse will look like, right? We have this general conception. I think Ben outlined it very well of what that world is likely to look like. But as he said, it's probably 10, maybe 20 years away. There's a lot of advances in both hardware and software and other technologies that would need to be achieved in order to really make that happen. And we don't know whether that metaverse will be decentralized, and really administered in a decentralized way by the users, or whether there'll be one central authority, right? We're assuming now that the metaverse is going to exist on blockchain and use NFTs for avatars and for other virtual goods and services, that you'll buy them with crypto. That's why we talked about them in the beginning. That's the foundation as we see it, but we don't really know. And for right now, what we're seeing is not a metaverse, but these different meta worlds. And so you have Roblox and Fortnite and, the Sandbox and Decentraland. And so there's all these different models. They're completely separate and not connected. So, in this future metaverse world, will they figure out a way to connect different blockchains? I don't know. Maybe they won't. If they don't, then that means that the metaverse exists on one blockchain. And, again, will that be decentralized or centralized? It's really hard to know right now.
Interesting. I'd like to plunge in now and focus in on some of the IP issues in this Web3 world that Mark, you touched on during your introductory segment. And Sandra, I want to turn to you and ask you, so now that we're entering this new Web3 world, can you talk to us about some of the IP issues that you're seeing that we should be aware of?
Yes, of course. I mean, since the metaverse as such does not really exist now, the new issues we are encountering in the legal sphere basically relate to NFTs. And for new meta worlds, we are seeing issues similar to what we've seen before with virtual worlds such as Second Life, or also on social media to a certain extent. So not everything is really entirely new. What is definitely important to understand even more now is that the IP strategy must not be seen in isolation, but it has to be really an integral part of your overall company's business strategy. So IP strategy in the Web3 basically includes, first of all, brand protection, of course, because in such a surrounding, your brand and your IP rights in general will become more vulnerable than ever. Also creating additional revenue streams. We just touched this topic before, using legal tools such as licensing and co-branding. You may also want to make sure that there's legal certainty in your existing licensing relationships, because in particular, which party is entitled to offer virtual goods. This is a topic which is not addressed in most licensing agreements. There is also the topic of company IP enforcement or PR guidelines as well. I mean, how to deal with consumers who are so fond of your brand that they do all sorts of crazy things, creating content around it, and I mean, these problems we have seen them in social media context, of course, but this will happen even faster now. And mistakes in this area can really have a huge impact to your company's image and brand reputation. And also, last but not least, the all sorts of abusive use of IP rights, bad faith trademark applications, for example, for the so-called metaverse classes. Also IP infringements such as counterfeits, NFT counterfeits, counterfeit websites, and also more complex infringement cases, actually, of which we'll talk in a minute, which somewhat touch the boundaries of IP rights as monopolies in the virtual world.
Interesting. So you mentioned complex litigation cases involving some of these issues. Mark, can you talk to us more about how this may have come up in the US?
Sure, and there's 3 seminal cases that are going on right now, and I'll just really touch on them because they're ongoing. The first is Nike versus StockX. StockX has this product called Vault, and what they do is they store collectibles in the vault, physical collectibles, real world collectibles, and then issue an NFT to designate ownership of that collectible. As many who are watching know, shoes are very collectible, especially Nike shoes, and they can sell for a lot of money. And so StockX has a program for collectible Nike shoes where they issue an NFT for the shoe and they give a picture of the shoe, which they attach to the NFT. Nike sued StockX, alleging trademark infringement and dilution, I believe. And StockX basically asserted that it's making a fair use of the image, and it's got a First Amendment right under the first sale doctrine. It's able to designate a real world item that is just being resold on its platform. So, that's kind of one end of the spectrum. We'll see what the courts say about that. And next we have kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is Hermes versus Mason Rothschild. And here, many of you may be familiar with the famous Birkin's bag. What Rothschild did is he created over 100 NFTs using images of the Birkin bag covered in different types of fur. He's generated over $1 million in sales for these NFTs. Hermes, not very pleased with this, sued for trademark infringement, trademark dilution. And basically what Rothschild is saying is that his NFTs are protected by the First Amendment, and really it's just artistic expression. So here again, we will see what the courts have to say about this. And then finally, we have Miramax versus Quentin Tarantino. And here, Quentin Tarantino created NFTs for original handwritten versions of the script to Pulp Fiction, along with some commentary on it and some other things that he's throwing in. As you can imagine, Miramax not very happy with this, so they sued for alleging trademark infringement, copyright infringement, breach of contract. Here again, we're going to see what the courts say about this.
Sandra, turning back to you, are you able to translate what Mark discussed into an EU law perspective? How would some of these issues be viewed under an EU law rubric?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, we are looking to the US at the moment, and we are really excited about these new cases because as far as I can see, we do not have one published NFT case in Germany or court decision so far. But of course, I mean, we have different concepts, but the problems will be the same. I'm talking about the Nike and StockX case, for example. Well, this basically relates to the question, what is trademark-like use? That would be our concept in the EU. And the main function of a trademark is, of course, to serve as an indication of commercial origin. And the question is, does StockX use the Nike brand in order just to depict or to make sure that the NFT is just perceived as a claim ticket or something like that? And I mean, StockX defends itself saying that they are doing nothing else actually than commercial platform providers publishing article descriptions and using brand names there. And I mean, the German courts are particularly strict when it comes to this question and trademark owner friendly, as we have seen in similar cases, for example, involving style names. So this will be interesting. And also, I mean, the Meta-Birkin case, which basically deals with transformative words, with well, artistic freedom. I thought one thing that was interesting for me when I read there was a preliminary ruling just published recently that the court very much focused on the very first statements of Mason Rothschild about his own work, saying that it was supposed to be in tribute to the famous Hermes Birkin brand, and only later in the statement of defense, I think he just said it was more or less to criticize Hermes animal cruelty practices and things like that. So a German court would probably do this as well. And finally, the Tarantino case, which is first of all about the interpretation of licensing agreements and also for rights in works which you just could not foresee. And also from the German-American perspective, I mean, the Anglo-American copyright system is quite different from the German one, for example. We cannot sell copyrights because they are so much interrelated with the moral rights that they tend to remain always with the author, which is of course important if you're interpreting licensing agreements as well. So yeah, the problems will be the same, and probably as mostly in comparative law, we will come to very similar solutions, but on a different way.
Interesting. Ben, turning to you and sort of shifting gears to a more business and perhaps technical perspective, can you talk to us about what your thoughts are in terms of the challenges of enforcing IP rights in this Web3 world we've been talking about?
I think like I'm an accountant, so just to kind of go back and talk about accountancy, like a great example of this is there is no accounting standard for how you account for cryptocurrency, ICOs and stuff like that. It's all being formed. And actually people are running around saying, where do you even form this thing, right? Because, what we're talking about with the metaverse and these kind of blockchains, they're global digital kind of communities. They don't necessarily live in a country. Does that make sense? And that makes it a little bit more confusing to know how you kind of pin things down. And I was just looking at the picture of Quentin Tarantino and thinking, well, I think Miramax know where to find Quentin Tarantino when he's doing this. But let's say, for example, it was like a stranger who got hold of a load of scripts and started selling NFTs, and he's hiding behind an avatar, and we've got to trace him as a wallet. Practically, that's going to become much harder to kind of hunt him down. And that's one of the challenges we have, this emergent technology, which is moving very quickly, but we don't have kind of precedent on a technical I'm not going to kind of dwell into legal, but like on an accounting perspective, we don't, and it comes with all sorts of practical challenges.
Interesting. So one other topic that I'd like to address, and Mark, I'm going to turn back to you. Are trademark registrations for virtual goods or services necessary? How would you view that from a US perspective?
That's a very interesting question that's getting a lot of attention now. You have some companies like McDonald's that are investing heavily in trademark registrations for virtual goods and services. I think that it's going to depend to a large extent on, whether the metaverse and these virtual worlds are centralized or decentralized, right? I think to the extent they're centralized and there's a real company operating the virtual world or the metaverse, then it probably becomes less important to have a registration for the virtual version of your goods and services. I mean, we're seeing, in places like Second Life and Fortnite and other places, your traditional trademark rights are sufficient in order to get those virtual versions taken down. So I think probably not so much benefit to getting registrations for virtual goods and services, unless that's all you offer. If there's no real world version of your products, then I think it's probably beneficial to get these registrations for virtual goods and services. And then on the other side, if these worlds become decentralized, where there's no central authority, then I think, what value is there to have a registration at all whatsoever? There's no authority to go to bring your trademark registration to use it as an evidence of rights. And, do your trademark rights are territorial? Does geography even have any meaning in this decentralized world that has no centralized company anywhere on the earth that's running it?
Sandra, can you talk more about this concept of territoriality? How does that fit in?
Yes, I mean, as Mark just stated, trademark rights are territorial rights, and how you're going to enforce them in a completely endless metaverse world. This is, of course, a question clients ask us all the time, and right now we can just assume that trademarks will be helpful in any event. Of course, you cannot not file them anywhere in the world, but you also have additional protection by other IP rights as well, of course. So it's important to have a healthy mix of trademarks, designs, copyrights, and things like that in your entire portfolio. And coming back to the use of trademark registrations for virtual goods, I mean, there are no reliable guidelines right now as to how courts and trademark offices in the EU will consider this relationship between real and virtual goods and services. But we think it's fair to assume that it will be beneficial, at least for enforcement, for many reasons. Well, first of all, even owners of well-known brands have to provide evidence if they want, for example, file a preliminary injunction request. And this is much easier to assert infringement claims always based on identity or likelihood of confusion. And it's also much easier when you're dealing with enforcement authorities. I mean, courts, obviously, but also criminal authorities, platform operators. The liability of intermediaries will become very important. And so these like clear-cut cases, and also to protect you from bad faith trademark applications. And it will help you also in licensing relationships. So against this background, it may be beneficial to file trademarks in a metaverse classes, but it's probably not the solution for every problem, of course.
Thank you. Very interesting. I want to turn now to sort of a question that I think our audience will find beneficial. And Ben, I'd like to start with you. The question is, what is one piece of advice for boards or executives, for our audience, to think about?
Yeah, sure. I've got two, but I'm going to go with one, and then you can loop back, because I don't want to kind of steal one off Mark or Sandra and they kind of tell me off. Look, to me, one thing that's inevitable today is people are spending more time digitally. There's more screen time. We're working more. So one thing that we're talking to boards about is saying, look, be mindful of that, because there's a well-being aspect to this, where as an employer, you need to look after your people. There's productivity impact, that your people will be less productive. They get worn down by endless blue light and working this way, and this change in behavior, which has kind of happened through the pandemic. So when I look at the metaverse and I talk about it being a blending of digital and real, what it is, it's a kind of constant momentum towards using these devices. The idea that you would go into an office and you would use your computer, just in the morning to check emails, it's gone, right? Because we're just using devices around us all day. So that would be one thing which I think anyone sat in a C-suite or on a board, whether it's a small business or an enormous large corporate, will want to have on the agenda.
Interesting. Sandra, turning to you, what is your sort of one piece of advice for boards to think about?
Well, I could tell you something like use this to make an audit of your IP portfolio or your enforcement strategies. But there's one specific piece of advice I would have, namely put the IP strategy in the context of your overall Metaverse strategy and make people from different teams talk with each other. From my experience, one major obstacle for a good IP strategy, which is in line with the business strategy, is a lack of communication between expert teams in a company. And so really, more than ever, you need to foster a culture of involvement, I'd say, with all your different expert teams, so that they understand the value of IP in the Metaverse, find a common language, and also work closely together. Then this will become more important than ever when we are entering the Metaverse, finally.
Thank you. Mark, what is your piece of advice?
I think my piece of advice would be that for company executives or boards, you may not have a choice of whether you participate in the Metaverse and this new Web3 world. You may decide that it's not of interest to you or doesn't align with your corporate or branding strategy, but unfortunately, you may not have a lot of control over that, especially as we're seeing, the rise in NFT usage and the rise in creation of NFTs that incorporate third-party IP and brands. You still have to monitor what's going out there, and you still probably will have to take some enforcement action because consumers will assume that you're playing in the space because everyone else will be. So even though you may not want to, you still have to be vigilant and you have to be paying close attention to the marketplace, doing monitoring of these marketplaces, monitoring, online generally, just using search engines, searching for your brand in NFT, or your brand in blockchain, or your brand in Metaverse, and seeing what's out there, and you have to pay attention.
So to kind of bring this back to the title of this presentation, and Ben, turning back to you, do companies need a chief Metaverse officer?
I think it depends on all the things that Sandra and Mark have just talked about, the importance that you're there. I think what you definitely need is a chief digital officer who's au fait with Web 3.0 technologies and the Metaverse and is able to monitor them. Whether you need someone with that specific title would be down to the strategic importance of this emerging technology.
Sandra, how would you answer that question from your perspective in the EU and Germany?
Yes. I completely agree with Ben. I mean, there's no general answer to this. This varies from brand to brand. And it brings me also back to my one piece of advice. If you think it's helpful to have someone in charge, liaising between different teams and also having additional knowledge on cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and things like that, then go for it. But yeah, I completely agree. It's a very individual question.
And Mark, turning back to you, how would you answer that from a US perspective?
I agree with everything that Ben and Sandra said. It really depends on the company. I think you definitely need somebody who's digital and has expertise in Web3 and probably the Metaverse. But beyond that, it depends on what your company does and how active you'll be in the Metaverse. If your business depends on the Metaverse or meta worlds, then I think it's much more important and much more reasonable to have a chief Metaverse officer. But if you're just in a more common position of other companies with especially real world products, that's going to depend on your strategy going forward.
Excellent. Well, we've reached the end of our program, and at this point, we're happy to take any questions from the audience. And if there are none, we want to thank everyone for your time and your attention, and we will turn it back over to the EACC.
Yes, wow. Actually, I had a few questions, but you all answered them during the program. So thank you very much. Anyway, this concludes our webinar entitled Doing Business in the Metaverse. And we actually did have a few answers to the question, do we need a CMO, a Chief Metaverse Officer? And if there are any questions from the audience, feel free to send them to us and we will have the panel answer them. So many thanks to Dr. Sandra Müller, Ben Bisland, Jan Kubic, and Mark Trachtenberg for sharing your experience, your stories, and insights in this brave new world called the Metaverse. Thank you also to my colleagues from the EACC in New York, who kindly and generously worked in the background to ensure that this program was technically flawless. And of course, many thanks to you, the audience, who joined us today. Moving forward, you should check the EACC YouTube channel for recording of this program and keep an eye on our websites for upcoming programs. And you should please remember, EACC is a connector. You will be receiving a list of participants to this program. And if you are an EACC member and wish to be connected to another member, we'll be happy to facilitate that, just like in the real world. And if you're not a member and want to join, contact your local chapter to find out how. So this concludes our program, and I wish our speakers, our audience, and everybody else a wonderful summer.